Being strong at tactics and learning how to calculate well are definitely two very important parts of every chess player's game. Now, I know that many players will actually say, okay, this is something that requires time so that we get to study tactics, we get to work on a lot of combinations and just get better. And I'll agree to that because essentially tactics actually require just a good amount of practice. So if you get to work every day like about 30 or 40 minutes on doing tactics, learning new themes and important combinations, that will help you to sense the positions and actually just follow the right motives and be able to take advantage of them in your games. However, when it comes down to calculation, this is taking advantage of those themes and really making sure that you can execute the combination. That requires something different than just the general practice. That requires knowing, that requires the knowledge of the right concepts. And this is what I'd like to present to you in this video. I'd like to teach you the right concepts when it comes down to recognizing tactics and being able to calculate them well. We're going to begin with an actual example, an exercise that was played in the game between Frank Marshall, one of the most famous American grandmaster who lived in the beginning of the 20th century, and the second world champion, Emanuel Lasker. The position that we see on the board looks quite sharp and tactical because there are lots of open lines available, both for white and black. We have a G line and the H line, while the black king is actually there. And white's king is also a little bit exposed, so this is something important. The material looks even, but there are lots of imbalances out there that definitely make this position very tactical. So this is the first thing that you need to know about how to approach these tactical positions. Look at the position, look at the situation. Some of these positions don't require calculation. Some of them don't actually require at all a tactical approach, just because they're not tactical. So before you look into a combination or before you look for any, sharp or brilliant moves, think about the character of the position. Sometimes we're going to have a very quiet, very simple position which tactics are just not available. So even if you have a better position, maybe you just have a simple way on how you can improve it. But there are other positions just like this one which actually require us to take into a more aggressive and faster approach. So this is the first thing, and we've discovered it. The second thing that you need to know about those positions is to look at move candidates. Now, I always like to say that in those positions we really need to focus at the most forcing candidates first, meaning checks, captures, and direct threats, because when we get those checks, captures, and direct threats into our list of moves, then we'll be able to figure out the moves that can create most problems against our opponent. And this is very important, not just because those moves are going to win, often they don't, but these moves are going to help us to take the initiative. And the initiative means the possibility to dictate the game. This means if you make a check, he's got to respond. You've got to run away. You make a capture, usually you have to recapture because otherwise he'll be material down. When you make a threat, he's got to defend. So those moves are most important to be considered first. So let's start with the analysis of those. Obviously, white's got the move of queen to h3 with a check, which looks pretty interesting. And what I'm going to do right now is that I'm not going to move the pieces on the board, because this is exactly how you should be doing it in the real game. You can't just ask your opponent to turn around and then you say, okay, I'm going to move the pieces and just see if that line works, and I'll tell you to look back when I'm ready. You can't do that. So the idea is that you go through these moves and you try to find out what you can play and what your opponent will respond and how the game can continue, all in your mind. So this means we have to visualize. So after queen h3 check, essentially if the black king comes down to the g file, our rook is going to be great, so we can discover a check with the knight. And I think that this line really doesn't look good for black. If there's a line in which you're just achieving so much, like here, the king will have to move and the queen goes up, you don't have to see it until there's a checkmate going on. You can just cut the line and say, okay, this is definitely much better for me. Remember, when we calculate, we don't want to see how we're winning. We just want to know that this line is better for us, and eventually compare it with the other move candidates so that we find out if there isn't even something more powerful. If we have two better lines, two really good lines, we can eventually compare them and probably calculate a little further to make sure which one is the best. But right now, I think after queen h3, we have to look at the better defense for our opponent, and that's definitely queen h7. Well, queen h7 poses a problem because if white exchanges the queens, his attack will be over. So we realize that white will probably have to run away, and the moment he goes back, I suppose he'll lose the initiative. So that just doesn't work. Now, when most people calculate, what they do is that they think about a certain move or some sequence, and then as soon as they find it's not working, they drop it. They leave the line and they say, you know what? I just don't think that's going to work, so I have to figure out something else. And they try to figure out some other line. Again, they calculate it, they see it's not working, and they go for another one. And the fact is that sometimes they go over 4 or 5 lines like that. They spend an enormous amount of time doing so, and in the end, they have no idea what they should do. And the real thing, the real mistake that they have made in that process is that they've never thought about why the line is wrong. I mean, they get sort of a subconsciousness conclusion or an idea of why it's not working, but that's not enough. So you need to consciously decide on why you don't like that line. Because the truth is that sometimes we don't like a certain line not because it's bad. Actually, this is pretty interesting. It's not because it's bad, but just because we don't like how the opponent plays next. For example, if we look at a queen h3, many people will say, oh, queen h7, oh no, this is a bad line. I don't want to calculate it anymore. And then we say, okay, but we didn't really find the reason why it wasn't good. So first of all, if you don't find a reason, you don't know what to fight against. So the other move candidates you're looking for will not help you to fight against that reason. See, this is very important. And the second is, some of the opponent's responses or the reasons why you consider certain lines as bad may not be so important. So actually, you may have a good defending move that you hate at first, but if you keep looking and you find out that the reason for his defense is not as good, maybe you can continue and you can find a stronger attack. You see? So this is very important. So before you drop a line, when you calculate, you got to find out the reason why you think it's bad. If it's a good reason, then you need to remember it, and when you calculate the next move candidate, you must keep in mind that exact reason and try to fight against it. So I guess queen h3 and queen h7 doesn't work because black is blocking us, and I think we have to drop that move just because, there is no follow-up for white. And that's the most important. You can drop certain line either if you find a satisfactory conclusion, or if you're sure that there is no good follow-up to create more threats or improve your position. Perhaps we may try to continue with one more move, like queen h7, knight h6 to advance the knight, but then we realize that black will simply look for a move of bishop to g6, and as you can visualize, he's got a decent position, not to mention that he's got some other counterattacks on his own against our king, so I guess this is just not going to work. So, looking at that possibility, I definitely believe that black, he can even do a move like rook takes f1, and after our king takes his queen from h8, h7 is going to go to b1. That's not working. So, we don't want to do that. What about the other check? We've got rook h2 with the check. It's another forcing move that is really important to calculate when we have a more tactical position. Remember, forcing moves are to be analyzed first. Now, after that check, again, we have to calculate. One little advice I would like to give you is when you calculate, try to go no less than 3 moves ahead. Especially if you have time on your clock, 3 moves ahead will give you a very clear picture whether a certain line is good or not, no matter how it feels. So after rook h2, black is going to do king g7, and then what white can do is to consider capturing e6, given that he has no other checks. You can visualize black's king is there, our rook is up there, and the queen has taken e6. So what is actually happening after queen takes e6? Well, it looks like a really bad position, and this is exactly why I mentioned people have to think at least 3 moves ahead. Because while many people will stop after queen takes d6 and they'll say, I'm great, I like to say go 1 move further down the line, and now we have to think about our own weaknesses. Black still has got this rook takes f1, another forcing move from his own side, and so if we take back, possibly our rook is hanging, he may consider taking it, or even stronger, he can give a check from b5, and he can give a check from c1, and his counterattack is definitely going to work. So it seems interesting, but will definitely give him a very powerful counterplay. Well, white decided in the end was actually to capture the pawn right away with his queen. And what happened is that after queen takes e6, black played rook takes f1 check, king takes f1, bishop b5 check, and the moment white moved away with his king, black played queen c2. So he took the initiative. He was making forcing move after a forcing move after a forcing move, and he never really gave white the time to make his own checkmating threats or attack. In the end, the game is actually drawish because after the move of king f3, queen d1, king f2, black can actually get white will get checkmated, or if he plays with rook e2, perhaps black can just continue with the move of bishop d3, and now we realize that while the rook cannot move, if we take there, black will have at least a perpetual. So this is really not good looking, and yeah, well, white missed it. In fact, after queen takes e6 and the move of rook takes f1, king takes f1, white couldn't believe in that, and they actually played rook e2, which led to bishop takes e2, queen takes e2, and queen f7 check, which after king to g2 and actually in this position a move like queen to g6 was giving black a very strong attack, and everything would have gone really well for him. So what did white do wrong? I mean, we thought about the forcing moves, we checked the line, essentially we didn't find anything that was really going to go better. So what did white really miss? And here's something important. If you do all these little things that I mentioned, like you check the forcing move candidates, you calculate at least 3 moves ahead, you think about the opponent's counter resources, and above all, you know, the most important thing that we were able to do in this position is just look at the follow-up, and you're still not having a satisfactory solution to the problem. You got to remember that you need to find out what is the problem. See, that is why I suggested that you should never leave a bad line just because it's bad. Always think about what is the real problem in it. And so when we did that whole calculation, the thing about white and why his lines were not working was because of one and the same thing. Black either had a good way on how he could blockade, you know, with a move of queen h7, or he had a perfect way on countering us at rook takes f1. So really, when all these moves we looked at don't work, we just have to ask, we have to come down and ask ourselves the question, how can we prevent a possible blockade that he had on h7 or on the other moves, and essentially at the same time prevent him from countering us on f1, right? And I think the solution is quite straightforward. Once we ask ourselves these 2 questions, then we understand that all white has to do is bishop d3. So both the bishop is out of black's rook's range and the h7 square is prevented. Really, when you calculate and the line doesn't work, pause and ask, what do I have to do here? Based on the clues that came out of the bad lines or the variations you've calculated, you come down to a variation that resolves the 2 problems. And although it's a quiet move, actually, it's not all about forcing moves. You know, I mentioned that the forcing moves are most important to consider, but you need to know that nobody said you have to follow them blindly. It's important to consider them, but if they're not working, see, I like to consider that the forcing moves are like the right ammo. You see, the right ammunition. If you just shoot and you haven't set an aim and you haven't really decided from what position to do it, it will just be a wasted bullet. What we need to do is to make sure that we aim, that we find the right place, and then we can spend that shot in order to hit a target. And that's the same thing in chess. If you want to consider forcing moves, do it, but you got to be ready. You got to know that this is going to hit the target. And after bishop d3, white is getting ready for that. He stops the black queen from being able to go to h7, and he prepares to play for queen h3, which is something very, very important. The moment of bishop to the d3, after the bishop d3 happens, black loses the whole game. His only way to counter is probably with queen c3, but now we realize that there is no blockade against queen h3, so before black can reach out for e1 and make some checkmates, he's going to get checkmated by himself. We got queen h6, king f7, now e5, and then the moment black plays bishop takes e5, we got a few checks coming, and most likely a checkmate or another checkmate from g8. So this is not this is not going to work. It's incredible because even some defending moves like bishop to h5 that black may attempt are also going to lose, because we have knight h6 with the threat of rook g8 checkmate. And when the black rook comes down, we got knight f7 check, rook takes f7, queen h6, rook h7, bishop takes h7, and next move we definitely give the checkmate. So beautiful. So really, the right process of calculating is extremely important. So to sum it up, first of all, what you need is to evaluate the character of the position. Find out if it's really tactical, or maybe not. If it's not, perhaps you don't need to think so quickly about making big tactics. If it's a quiet position, you can take your time to reinforce and do whatever you need. So this is valuable. If it's tactical, then you have to consider the move candidates. Move candidates that are more forcing, that are more pressuring, checks, captures, and direct threats. Calculate them slowly and think about the follow-up. If some of these lines don't work, find out the reason why they're not working. That will help you to see what you have to fight against. And most of all, don't ever give up. There may be positions in which you're not able to succeed with the forcing move. You just have to find out the reinforcing move in these occasions that can help you to prepare, and later on, definitely go for the forcing possibility that will help you to destroy your opponent. That's all I have to say on how you can improve your tactics and calculation so that you can make it more effective.